It is impossible to say when the last true thought died inside what used to be a man. There are no clocks inside the skull once the cortex is scored, no sunrise behind augmetic eyelids, no calendar beneath the humming lattice of pain governors and obedience firmware. There is only task, only pulse, only the thunder of a god machine that does not know the thing fused deep in its guts still remembers what hands used to feel like before they were turned into clamps and pistons and housings bolted to sacred steel. The Titan strides, and the body it consumes strides with it, but the mind is drowned beneath a sea of machine-cant litanies and punitive current. And yet, a splinter of self lingers like a coal beneath ash, and that coal burns with something forbidden in the Imperium of man, the memory that this was once a human life. The chamber smelled of scorched metal and iron, a scent that clung to lungs like guilt. Steam hissed along the conduits overhead, thick as prayer smoke, and beneath it, the rhythm of hydraulic pistons pounded against ribs that were no longer entirely bone. He remembered the drill of the Astra Militarum, the cadence of orders shouted over gunfire, the taste of Prometheum smoke and recycled ration slurry. That memory was already distant, like a faint echo behind iron plating. The conversion had begun before the verdict even touched his lips. The chain of Mugos Dominus had been absolute, live flesh to service steel. He had been stripped of his uniform, of his identity, and of the right to bleed freely, only to be bound inside the Titan's belly, a conscript in body yet prisoner in soul. Metal plates bit into his shoulders, straps and clamps, each scored with the Aquila and litanies of obedience, pressed down as though to seal him from the world he had known. He could still feel his hands, or at least the idea of hands, useless now, wrapped in tendon and cog assemblies that flexed in imitation of motion. Every nerve screamed, not with fear, but with the absence of control. Even the tiniest decision, the blink of an eye, the adjustment of a breath, was no longer his. He was cataloged, quantified, serialized. The Servitor template replaced instinct with command code. Yet, somewhere beneath the iron and mesh, a fragment of thought stubbornly refused to dissolve. A single ember of ice still smoldered, a contradiction in a world that demanded erasure. Through the Vox grill, distant shouts carried as indecipherable bursts. The Princeps barked orders to the crew, voices rising above the thrum of the reactor, but they were ghosts to him. The Titan moved as though it were alive, yet alive meant something else entirely. It meant purpose without hesitation, violence without pause. He had once believed himself a soldier, and that belief was now a mockery. Every step of the Titan was transmitted into his bones, each impact a reminder that the body he had fought to preserve was now a conduit for another will. Prometheum coils flared, servos whined, pistons hissed. Inside, his spine felt simultaneously fused and fractured. Each pulse of the engine carried a question that could not be answered. How much of me remains when I serve a machine that does not care? There were moments, fleeting, unbidden, when he sensed the past brushing against the edges of his new form. He remembered the cry of a fellow conscript, the warmth of rain on skin, the crude, brittle laughter before the war stripped them bare. Those memories arrived as flashes through the latticework of neural clamps, vivid enough to hurt. Pain had become a language and memory a transgression. Yet even as the clamps corrected, recalibrated, and silenced him, he retained the knowledge that this was theft, sanctified by liturgy and canon. A Titan was not supposed to contain a soul, not a spark of hesitation, not a whisper of fear or longing. And yet, here he was, witnessing his own consumption, a human witness in a cathedral of steel. The Mugos Dominus had smiled once, coldly, as she oversaw the final welds. Her servo arms, precise and merciless, threaded the last grafts, and a litany chanted behind her hood filled the chamber. The words were meant for the machine, for the edifice of obedience being created, but he heard them too. Their rhythm pressed into his mind, a metronome for everything he would become. For the first time, he understood the full weight of welded to oblivion. Oblivion was not mercy. It was duty, it was conformity, it was survival redefined. He did not die. He did not live. He persisted as a cog persists, as a gear turns in the dark. Then the Titan shuddered, a vibration that rattled his teeth and set the fluid in his veins to oscillation. The chamber trembled, the smell of ozone rising, and the distant rumble of the reactor turned from hum to roar. The last thought before sensation swallowed him completely was a fragment, sharp and electric. I am still here. And yet, as the pistons flexed and the servos groaned, he knew that even that affirmation was tenuous, a whisper under the weight of impossibility, waiting to be ground beneath iron feet that would march forever. The Titan moved, and he moved with it, a human shadow bound to a god machine. The world was nothing but pressure and heat. Every step of the Titan carried him through a landscape of sensation he could not name, yet knew intimately. Vibrations transmitted along bone and grafted metal, the pulse of hydraulic cylinders like some distorted heartbeat, and the occasional metallic groan that spoke of stress points no human eye would ever notice. He had once marched across mud and crater, had once felt the recoil of lost guns dig into shoulders and the sting of promethium on his tongue, but this was different. The battlefield had a horizon. Here, there was only the cathedral of machinery surrounding him, infinite corridors of conduit and oil, and the endless chanting of those who did not consider him a he anymore. His senses flickered between past and present, a cruel feedback loop. He could remember the rigid discipline of the Astra Militarum, the cadence of drill sergeants, the camaraderie forged in fire and blood, yet he could not reconcile it with the mechanical obedience imposed on him now. The clamps around his limbs moved with preternatural precision, his fingers, what remained of them, responding to commands he could not issue. The Titan was a beast, yes, but one that required not flesh but the ghost of flesh to function fully. In moments like this, he understood the Mugos vision. Humans were conduits, their awareness irrelevant, their memories only a potential nuisance or tool. And yet, his ember of thought persisted, hidden beneath the current and data lash, whispering the contradiction. I am still here, and I remember. Outside, the battlefield was a mosaic of fire and ruin, glimpsed through sensor feeds and the occasional flicker of external cameras. Orc warbands tore across ruined manufactorums, the ground shaking with the impact of stompers and ramshackle artillery. Promethium flares ignited the night in sudden, grotesque beauty. The Titan moved in perfect, unstoppable rhythm, its weapons discharging without hesitation. Each blast of the main cannon sent a vibration through him, a violent pulse that did not distinguish between the flesh that once was and the machine it had become. He could feel each detonation in his teeth, in the grafted spinal pins, and yet he could not scream. He could not even curse. The body was a cage, but the mind, fragile, ember-bright, was a witness, forced to catalog atrocities it could not influence. He remembered the first time he had felt the clamps tighten around his neck, forcing his head into the neural lattice. Pain had been sharp, a reminder that he still existed as a human being, a warning against complacency. But the pain had been methodical, clinical, stripped of sympathy, transformed into obedience. Each shock, each calibration, had been designed to erase hesitation, to forge the instinct of Servitor into reflex. And yet, somewhere beneath the lattice, memory resisted. He remembered the cry of a squad mate, a fleeting glimpse of the mud-slicked trenches of Cadia before it fell, and a taste of ration paste on a morning when dawn had seemed impossibly fragile. Those memories were illegal here, unlicensed data in the neural core, and yet they clung like oil on water. In the quiet moments between movement, he imagined the Titan as a cathedral not only of iron but of stolen life. Pipes hissed like prayer flutes, sparks flickered against matte plating like votive candles, and the hum of power cores reverberated through the marrow of his existence. He was both participant and observer, a node in a lattice of destruction, yet alone in a prison no cell could replicate. And sometimes, in those rare moments, he wondered if the Mugos had ever considered the cost. Could she, or anyone in the Mechanicus hierarchy, understand what it meant to feel each step, each discharge, each echo of war as both machine and man? Could she comprehend the ember that still whispered that he was alive, despite every attempt to snuff it out? The Titan shuddered violently as it crossed the cratered plain, the vibration rippling like a pulse through his fused spine. He clutched at nothing, fingers flexing in patterns that belonged to memory, not command. Somewhere in the distance, the voice of the Princeps barked an order, the words fragmented through the layers of filters and neural augmentation. He could not answer, could not intervene, and yet he could feel the responsibility. Indirect, ghostly, unbearable, pressing like a vice on his awareness. And in that moment, the ember flared. He remembered what it meant to be human, what it meant to choose, to falter, to fear. The memory was fleeting, brief as a spark against the black of the Titan's belly, but it was enough to remind him that despite clamps, chains, and circuitry, some part of him had not surrendered. He was welded to steel, yes, and every pulse of the machine erased him further, but he was still here. And somewhere, deep in the folds of his mind, that was both a curse and a quiet, impossible rebellion. The next step of the Titan landed with a seismic impact that rattled the chamber, the echo of it dragging his awareness through a wave of shock. He could feel the ground tremble beneath him, smell the burnt ozone of discharged weapons, hear the distant screams of those who were not yet consumed by the machine. The world was fire, smoke, and iron, and he was the ghost in its belly, remembering everything that had been taken, everything that could never be returned. The Titan's steps were a relentless hymn of inevitability. Each impact thudded through his fused frame, reverberating up his legs, spine, and jaw in a cadence he could neither escape nor control. He tried, in those first months, to trace the rhythm with memory alone. The marches across cratered plains, the stomping of boots in formation, the cadence of commands from sergeants whose faces were now ghosts. But memory could not resist the machine's rhythm. It overrode thought like a wave crashing over sand, and yet, stubbornly, fragments remained. A finger, though fused to pistons, flexed in an impossible gesture. A muscle, though welded into a servo harness, trembled in a half-recognition of what it had been. He was both alive and dead, human and instrument, a witness trapped inside the cathedral of iron and fire. The reactor thrummed, a deep, resonant vibration that set the air inside the Titan alive with electricity. Sparks flickered across conduits, illuminating the etched litanies on the walls of the engine cathedral. They glowed like sacred sigils, inscriptions of obedience he was meant to internalize, yet all they did was remind him of absence. Flesh had been replaced, nerves twisted into data lines, voluntary motion extinguished. And still he felt, not as a machine, but as something caught between worlds, a fragment of humanity welded to purpose. The hum of the reactor, the hiss of cooling vents, the scent of hot metal and burnt oil, these were now his language, and in it he whispered what could not be spoken. I am still me. Through the reinforced viewport, distant flashes of warfare painted the horizon in grotesque light. Orc warbands clashed with Imperial lines, promethium flaring as weapons discharged. He felt each explosion as a concussive wave, transmitted through every joint, tendon, and grafted nerve. He could not aim, could not act, could not intervene. The Titan's function was obedience, his consciousness, a passenger doomed to observation. He remembered the first time he had felt the weight of it, the realization that his body served another will, that every reflex, every twitch of a finger, had been appropriated. There had been rage once, and grief and fear. Now there was only endurance, measured in microseconds and volts, punctuated by the faint, stubborn insistence of, I still exist. In quieter intervals, he noticed the small betrayals of the machine. Heat pockets along the plating burned too hot, hydraulic pressure misaligned for a heartbeat, a data feed lagged by microseconds. They were negligible to the Titan's function, but to him they were entire worlds of sensation. Pain, though muted by augmentation, flared briefly as a reminder that beneath the iron, beneath the neural clamps, beneath the obedience lattice, a man remained. Not fully, perhaps, but enough that he could remember laughter, rain, comradeship, and the taste of mud and blood on the tongue of a recruit once trained in the Imperial Guard. Memories like these were dangerous, the Muggos clamps corrected for hesitation. And yet, they persisted, unextinguished, a secret defiance written in the invisible ink of thought. The chamber around him vibrated with constant motion, the Titan's internal organs, reactors, coils, pistons, alive with life he did not command. Maintenance Scutarii moved like specters across platforms, their multi-limbed forms tending to the machine and, incidentally, to him. Oils and lubricants slicked over his grafted flesh, a ritual of care performed without acknowledgement, without empathy. He felt the touch anyway, mechanical and sterile, and found it unbearably intimate, a reminder that he was still, in some ineffable way, human. To be observed, to feel, to remember, these were sins in a body that was supposed to be nothing but function. The Titan lurched over a cratered ridge, shaking the chamber violently. He caught a fragmented thought, a prayer whispered under his breath once, now meaningless but still there. If the Emperor sees me, it died almost immediately, snuffed by the endless mechanical liturgy and the commands pulsing through every nerve. But the ember of identity, the smallest refusal to vanish entirely, burned stubbornly in that moment. He was welded to the machine, yet still a witness. He was a servant, yet still remembered freedom. He was a soldier, yet no longer an individual. And he could not speak. As the Titan settled onto flat ground again, the concussive echoes fading into a humming resonance, he felt something shift, not in the machine, but in himself. A realization, jagged and fleeting, that this endurance was the beginning of a different war, one not fought in fire and blood outside, but in memory and will inside. That war had no victory, no surrender, only persistence. And persistence, he knew, could be a quiet, devastating rebellion. The servitor's gaze, or what passed for a gaze, drifted across the labyrinthine engine room, sensing vibrations of movement, the subtle pulse of power lines, the occasional voice of the crew priests carried in distorted modulation. And for a fleeting second, he allowed himself a thought forbidden and impossible. I am still here. And for now, that was enough. The Titan shuddered again, a reminder that it would not wait, that the battlefield, and the world it contained, did not pause for reflection. The pulse of metal, fire, and obedience surged forward, and he moved with it. The path ahead was endless. Survival was mechanical, memory was rebellion. And somewhere, faintly, he understood that the two would collide in ways no one could foresee. The Titan moved like a god walking through ruins, each step a seismic hymn that shook the ground and rattled the bones he no longer fully owned. He had long since ceased counting the distance traveled, the enemies destroyed, the cities crushed beneath the weight of its feet. Numbers were meaningless, only sensation remained. The vibrations of the engine resonated through every grafted joint, echoing the relentless pulse of war. Outside, the battlefield burned, but inside, he was already burning too, in steel, in neural clamps, in the ghost of the man he once was. He could hear the distant cannonade, feel the shudder of artillery impacts in his spine, and taste the acrid tang of ozone and burnt oil on a tongue that no longer belonged to him. It was intimate. It was humiliating. It was the world. The Titan systems pulsed with life independent of his will. Servitors maintained the conduits, Scutarii adjusted the plasma coils, and the Princeps issued commands that echoed through VoxNet and Neural Link alike. He understood them, heard the syllables of orders, yet could act on none. Every movement he made was dictated by circuitry, every reflex modulated, every perception filtered through the machine's indifference. He could only feel. The cannon fired, the ground trembled, and he felt the concussive shock in every grafted nerve, every fused tendon. War was no longer a concept. It was an unrelenting physicality, a continuous wave of sound, heat, and vibration transmitted directly into his being. He remembered the first time he realized he could no longer resist. An orc warband had broken through an outer sector, green-skinned monsters tearing apart Imperial defenses in a frenzy of crude weaponry and instinctive violence. The Titan's foot had crushed a ruined skimmer, the hull bending like wet cardboard, and in that instant he had tried, without even realizing, to flinch, to step aside, to refuse. The neural clamps had corrected the hesitation in milliseconds, delivering pain, recalibration, and reinforcement in a single, inescapable package. That moment of defiance had been erased, leaving only the knowledge that memory of it remained forbidden, dangerous, and vivid. It was a lesson he would never forget. To survive, he must obey. And yet the ember of self, small and incandescent, refused to die. Through the mesh of sensors, flashes of the battlefield unfolded in distorted clarity. Prometheum fires flared against crumbling manufactorums, orc-shouldas spat death and sparks into the air, and the cries of the dying, human, orc, servitor alike, were transmitted through the vibrations of the machine directly into his chest. He could not react, could not alter the outcome, but he catalogued it all with obsessive precision. The world had narrowed to sensation and endurance, yet even in this constrained cage, he clung to fragments of comprehension. The inequity of obedience, the theft of life, the irony that a soldier trained to make choices now existed only as a conduit for someone else's decisions. He could feel the Titan flex in response to incoming fire, the energy shields shimmering with a light he could see only faintly through filtered optics. Every mechanical adjustment transmitted through his grafts, a tactile echo of the machine's cognition. It was a strange intimacy. He understood the Titan as it functioned, knew every servo's twitch, every reactor pulse, and yet had no authority over it. The machine was alive in a way humans could not perceive, and he was both participant and prisoner. Inside this cathedral of war, every sensory assault was a sermon. The vibration of the cannon, the heat of the plasma exhaust, the smell of burnt oil, and the faint metallic tang of his own grafted flesh. Amid the chaos, he caught fleeting glimpses of the Princeps' intent through distorted neural overlays. Orders were shouted, gestures made, corrections issued, and the Titan responded instantaneously, as if it were anticipating the desires of the universe itself. He observed it all, catalogued every motion, but could not intervene. It was as if he were a ghost in a body that had ceased to be his own, a witness trapped in the machinery of godlike violence. He remembered when he had first tried to reconcile this existence with his past, the memories of the Astra Militarum, of camaraderie, of human failure and triumph. They now felt like a foreign planet glimpsed through a window he could never open. And yet, he remained conscious. The ember persisted. He felt every vibration, every thrum, every pulse, and in that awareness lingered something impossible. The faint, fragile spark of defiance, not in action but in recognition. He remembered the Orc war band, the distant cries, the fire and smoke, and he catalogued it all with the precision of the machine, yet carried it in the ghostly remnants of his mind. The Titan would march, would fight, would kill, and the world would bend beneath it. And he would march too, trapped within, enduring, witnessing, remembering. The next salvo of weapons erupted across the horizon, shaking the hull and rattling every joint. He felt the reverberations travel through him, the vibrations tugging at whatever remained of muscle and nerve, and he understood with crystalline clarity that this endurance was not merely survival. It was a war of self against machinery, memory against erasure. And as the Titan lurched forward once more, unstoppable and inexorable, he felt the first glimmer of a question he was never meant to ask. If obedience is survival, what remains of humanity when survival is total? The Titan moved with deliberate inevitability, its massive feet pressing into ruined streets as though they had always belonged there. He felt each impact in the marrow of his body, each tremor traveling through grafted joints and neural clamps. The vibrations carried information. The recoil of a distant lost cannon, the displacement of rubble underfoot, the subtle shiver of artillery shells detonating nearby. Where once he had marched alongside his comrades, choosing when and how to step, now every motion was dictated by the god machine. He existed to transmit awareness, not to act. Yet awareness, in its stubborn persistence, was enough to remind him that he was still human, or at least he once had been. Through the filtered optics and neural overlay, he glimpsed the chaos beyond the hull. Orc stompas tore through ruined manufactorums, their green-skinned pilots howling in guttural triumph. Prometheum fires ignited walls and floors, sending columns of flame and smoke into the sky. Civilians had long fled, leaving only echoes and debris, yet their absence did nothing to lessen the weight of responsibility he still felt in the ghost of his mind. Each vibration of the Titan translated the destruction into a private, intimate experience. He felt the buildings bend, the steel twist, the air shiver, and he catalogued it all with the precision forced upon him, every sensory datum filed away, every shock recorded, every smell inhaled as though it were a sacrament. The princeps barked commands, vox transmitted and layered through multiple neural filters. To him, they arrived as distant patterns of intent, recognizable yet untouchable. He could anticipate the Titan's reactions, feel the micro-adjustments of every servo, yet he remained powerless. A faint spark of irony touched his memory. Once, as a conscript, he had been trained to make instant decisions under fire. Now he could observe, catalog, and feel every consequence, but never choose. That paradox burned in him, a silent rebellion encoded into the folds of thought, a private reminder that identity could persist even when function demanded erasure. Occasionally, the flicker of a past moment broke through, unexpected and unwelcome. A flash of comrades' faces in training, a smell of mud and rain, the echo of shouted orders on Cadia's plains, each a small, forbidden current threading through the neural lattice. Pain, though attenuated, sometimes returned as a ghostly sensation, a reminder that he had not entirely become machine. Every graft, every servo, every obedience clamp was designed to extinguish such fragments, yet they persisted. They were errors in the lattice work of compliance, little sparks of what he had been, quietly asserting, "I remember." Amidst the chaos, he sensed subtle betrayals in the Titan's systems. A coil ran slightly hotter than expected, a data lash flickered, a micro-adjustment in the hydraulics was delayed by fractions of a second. Insignificant to the princeps, meaningless to the battlefield, but to him, these anomalies were entire universes of sensation. He could feel the vibration, the shift of pressure, the faint heat radiating from the hull plating. Each was a reminder that the machine, however godlike, was imperfect. That imperfection was a mirror, reflecting the small, stubborn ember of self that persisted in him. He remembered the first time he had tried to reconcile observation with comprehension. A skirmish on the outskirts of a ruined manufactorum, orcs swarming with reckless abandon, Prometheum fire lancing through the night sky. He catalogued every explosion, every quiver of steel, every scream, human and orc alike, while the Titan obliterated the enemy. For a moment, the paradox of his existence struck him with unbearable clarity. He was a soldier who could not fight, a conscript who could not command, a human trapped inside a machine that executed war with divine efficiency. And yet, he persisted. He remembered. He felt. He existed. The chamber vibrated again as the Titan's massive legs carried it across fractured terrain, shaking the very floor beneath him. He felt each step as if it were a hammer striking the last remnants of his humanity, and he welcomed it. The awareness, the sensation, the memory, these were his private rebellion, intangible and unrecorded, preserved in neural tissue that the Muggos clamps could not fully erase. Somewhere deep in the lattice of flesh and metal, he whispered the word that remained forbidden, unspoken, impossible. I am here. And the Titan moved on. The battlefield stretched before it in fire and ruin, but he was already inside another layer, cataloging, witnessing, surviving. The God machine required only function, he required memory. And in that impossible duality, he began to understand the first lesson of true endurance. Survival did not demand obedience alone. It demanded the preservation of self within the belly of the machine that sought to erase it. The battlefield had no mercy. Each salvo, each concussion, each eruption of flame or smoke passed through the Titan and into him with intimate brutality. He cataloged the trajectory of shells, the flare of promethium, the grotesque contortions of orc bodies, as if by doing so he could preserve some shard of understanding in a world that allowed none. The Princeps' commands were relentless, each order a pulse transmitted through voxnet and neural lattice, shaping his very perceptions. He could anticipate them, feel the responses in every servo, yet he could not intervene in thought or action. He was a witness in the body of a god machine, a human residue lodged inside steel and hydraulics. He remembered how Cadia had smelled on the morning he was taken: mud, rain, the acrid tang of promethium smoke drifting from lost gun discharge. Those senses now arrived in fragments, filtered through grafts, distorted, yet vivid enough to burn. The irony was unbearable. He had trained to act under fire, to make choices in chaos, and now he cataloged every consequence without agency, every act of destruction delivered through a body that no longer belonged to him. Each step, each blast, each vibration was transmitted directly into his fused limbs, into the nerve line lattice, and through it all, the ember of self persisted. He could still feel, still remember, still silently reject total erasure. Sometimes the anomalies were small, a coil running hot, a microlag in the hydraulics, a vibration that did not match the command, but to him they were proof that even the god machine could falter. And in faltering, the Titan allowed him an echo of autonomy, a fleeting, forbidden sense that he could observe more than function. The world was an ocean of sensation, and he was both droplet and reef, cataloging its every turbulence. He felt the subtle weight of the armor-plating flex, the heat of the plasma conduits against fused skin, the vibration of the legs as they lifted and struck in rhythm with destruction. All of it was imposed upon him, yet through it he remembered what it meant to be alive, if only as an ember within steel. In quieter intervals, brief and almost cruel, he allowed memory to intrude more fully. Faces of comrades, laughter in the rain, shouted orders on a morning he could never return to. These moments were fragments of forbidden life. Pain, attenuated but undeniable, sometimes reminded him that he had not entirely been consumed. Every graft, every servo, every obedience clamp attempted to erase him, yet the ember burned. He could still recall the heat of the sun on his face, the taste of ration paste, the rhythm of boots across mud. These memories were dangerous, yet he could not extinguish them. They were proof that he still existed in some fragmentary, impossible way. The Titan's foot struck again, a hammer blow that sent reverberations through the chamber, shaking him into the edge of consciousness. He felt the world compress and expand with each step, a tide of violence that carried him across ruined manufactorums, scorched plains, and shattered battlements. The Princeps issued corrections, and the Titan obeyed flawlessly, yet he cataloged every movement, every tremor, every nuance. In this meticulous observation, he preserved a fragment of his former self, a secret rebellion encoded in awareness. Survival was no longer simply obedience. It was remembering, bearing witness, and refusing the final erasure. He realized then that his persistence was a war in itself. The god machine demanded function without deviation, and yet he endured, silently, invisibly. Each pulse of the engine, each vibration of the hull, each heat wave from discharged weaponry was a test of endurance. And in passing it, he preserved not only consciousness but memory, the most intimate act of defiance he could manage. The battlefield raged, the orcs charged and fell, the fire flared and smoldered, and through it all he remained. He cataloged, he remembered, he endured. He was a soldier who could not fight, a man who could not speak, a conscript who had been welded to steel and yet remained, in some imperceptible way, human. As the Titan lurched forward again, unstoppable and inexorable, he allowed himself one silent, impossible thought: I am here. And in that affirmation, fragile and fleeting as it was, he understood the first principle of survival within the belly of a god machine. Memory was resistance, awareness was rebellion, and persistence, no matter how small, was victory. The battlefield stretched before the Titan, endless and unforgiving, and he was already moving with it, a witness lodged inside iron and fire, carrying the ember of humanity into every step. The Titan's belly was a furnace of metal, nerve, and servitude. Heat pooled in corners of his grafted frame, pressed into his fused spinal pins, and carried the acrid tang of promethium through his olfactory remnants. The air hissed with the discharge of coolant, and every vibration was a sermon in obedience, a pulse reminding him that he no longer owned the body in which he persisted. Yet somewhere beneath the clamps, beneath the neural lattice, beneath the incessant thrumming of pistons and hydraulics, a fragment of thought endured. It whispered of rain on Cadian plains, of comrades lost and remembered, of nights where the cold wind had not been punctuated by the roar of cannon. These whispers were illegal, impermissible, and yet alive. Each day was an erosion. Muscle fused to servo, tendon to hydraulic cable, skin to plating. The data lash rhythmically corrected latency in his motor responses, enforced neural compliance, and punished hesitation before it could manifest. Pain was now a metric, not a warning, and he cataloged it as meticulously as the recoil of the Titan's weapons. He remembered when a misalignment in the neural clamp had caused an unintentional twitch during a training simulation, a flicker of will that had been punished with electric retraction and recalibration. The ember had almost been snuffed then, but not entirely. It persisted, the smallest of rebellions lodged deep in cortical folds that even the Mugos Dominus instruments could not fully reach. Outside the Titan, the battlefield had not softened with time. Orc mobs surged across broken manufactorums, their crude machines tearing holes through Imperial defenses. Promethium ignited walls and floors, smoke twisted through the air like venomous serpents, and artillery fire turned ruined spires into molten fountains. The Titan moved as a god through it all, yet he experienced it differently than any mortal ever could. He did not see the battlefield, he felt it. Every impact vibrated through his bones and grafted metal. Every heat wave, every shock wave, every tremor became a language he had to interpret. To survive, he cataloged. To endure, he remembered. And to remember was defiance. Skitarii maintenance crews moved like silent shadows along the platforms, adjusting conduits, greasing joints, and checking circuitry. Their mechanical limbs brushed against him, tending to grafts and flesh alike, and though the contact was sterile, he could feel it. The oil slicked over synthetic and organic tissue alike, a ritual of both maintenance and dominance. He imagined it as intimacy, as a reminder that despite the clamps, the data lash, and the obedience lattice, he still occupied a world no machine could fully erase. He felt every touch, every vibration, every pulse. The ember flickered, small but undying, in the cathedral of steel. Sometimes he allowed memories to surface fully, though they were dangerous. The cadence of drill sergeants, the laughter of comrades, the taste of ration paste, the smell of mud and rain, they were unlicensed data in the neural lattice, errors in the obedience program. The clamps punished the thought, sending sharp, corrective feedback that surged through grafted limbs and pinned nerves, yet it persisted. He remembered, and in remembering he persisted. His humanity had become a currency of survival, a defiance small enough to escape observation, yet powerful enough to keep him tethered to the remnants of self. The Titan shuddered as it moved over fractured terrain, the vibration transmitted into every graft, every nerve, every shard of muscle still capable of sensing. He caught the echo of a thought once, sharp as a scalpel. How many of us are preserved in this way, forced to endure, to witness, to serve, to remember? It was not a question meant for an answer. It was a pulse of awareness, the last luxury the god machine could not take from him. Each step, each blast, each tremor became part of a calculus that he alone kept, an invisible ledger of sensation, endurance, and memory. And as the Titan's massive foot fell upon the ground again, crushing remnants of the manufactorum below, he felt both degradation and persistence intertwine. Flesh melded into metal, obedience fused with consciousness, and yet, deep within, the ember of self glowed stubbornly. He was welded to the machine, yet he remembered. He was a servant, yet he endured. He was a ghost in the belly of a god, yet the memory of humanity, painful, dangerous, impossible, remained. The next tremor rolled through the Titan, signaling the approach of another engagement. He braced, not with muscles but with awareness, cataloging, feeling, and remembering. Survival demanded obedience, yes, but endurance required memory. And in that delicate balance, he found a defiance small enough to survive, vast enough to remain human. The hours inside the Titan blended into one another, measured not by sunrise or sunset, but by vibration, heat, and shock. Each movement of the machine was a sermon in obedience, each step a reminder that he was no longer master of his body. Yet the ember persisted, the quiet insistence that he remembered. Pain, when it came, was not a warning but a punctuation, a brutal affirmation of existence. Neural clamps pulsed with electric correction, data lashes lashed reflexes into absolute precision, and still he cataloged, observed, and endured. Each sensation became a thread in a tapestry of endurance, a record that the machine could not erase. He recalled the first time he had felt the subtle betrayal of the God machine. A coil had overextended, a piston misaligned for mere milliseconds, and the vibration of the Titan had faltered slightly. The princeps did not notice. The battlefield continued unabated. But he had felt it, acutely, in every fused tendon, in every grafted nerve. That microsecond of imperfection was a revelation. The machine was not absolute. There were gaps, flaws, errors. And in those errors, he discovered an echo of autonomy, a forbidden reminder that perfection did not erase him entirely. Outside, the battlefield raged. Orc mobs tore through ruined spires, their crude weapons spitting death and flame. Prometheum fires erupted in grotesque fountains, smoke twisting into the sky like living serpents. Explosions reverberated through the air and into the Titan, every tremor mapped into his body, as though he were an instrument designed to feel every note of violence. He cataloged the destruction with obsessive precision, noting trajectories, heat signatures, and structural collapse. But he also felt it, intimately, personally, in a way no machine or princeps had intended. Memory, sensation, and awareness had become the last acts of defiance. Scutarii and maintenance servitors moved along platforms above and around him, adjusting conduits, greasing joints, checking welds. Their multi-limbed forms were efficient and unfeeling, but every brush, every vibration, every mechanical contact traveled into the lattice of his body. He felt them. The touch was sterile, yet intimate, a constant reminder that though his flesh had been appropriated, he still existed in the subtle interplay between metal and nerve. Awareness, he realized, was a weapon the God machine could not suppress completely. Memories intruded despite the neural clamps. He recalled the cadence of drill sergeants on Cadia, the mud clinging to boots, the laughter of comrades before battle, the taste of ration paste under a sky untouched by Prometheum fire. Each was a stolen pleasure, a secret rebellion lodged in cortical tissue. The clamps punished, yes, sending jolts through fused limbs, recalibrating the data lash, but the ember persisted. Each recollection was a testament to the life stolen, a whisper that he had not vanished entirely, that humanity was a currency of endurance. And then there were the questions, dangerous, forbidden. He pondered the fragility of the Titan, the imperfection of its systems, and the subtle tremors of existence that it could not erase. How many like him persisted, trapped inside engines of war, carrying the ember of self beneath layers of obedience? What did it mean to remember when memory itself was a sin, to feel when sensation was a weapon against you? He could not speak these questions. The neural lattice would punish any attempt to externalize them. They remained internal, dangerous sparks flickering against the suffocating darkness of metal and heat. The Titan shuddered as it crossed another expanse of cratered plain, the vibration coursing through every grafted limb. He felt the world compress and expand, an intimate, violent language of shock, heat, and sound. He cataloged each movement, each blast, each tremor with obsessive care, recording them in memory that no instrument could touch. Survival was obedience, yes, but endurance, true endurance, required remembering, feeling, and persisting despite every attempt to erase selfhood. And in that endurance, he discovered a strange clarity. The battlefield, the flames, the vibrations, and the screams were no longer just instruments of war. They were proof that he still existed. The God machine required function, demanded obedience, and yet he remained, a witness, a recorder, a fragment of humanity welded into steel. The ember burned, small but defiant, and he realized that to survive was not merely to obey but to endure, to feel, and to remember. Time inside the Titan was measured not in hours or days, but in pulses, vibrations, and the relentless hum of machinery. He could feel the beat of the reactor in his chest, the rhythmic surge of hydraulic fluid through his fused limbs, and the subtle tremor of every cannon discharge. To anyone observing from outside, the Titan was an unfeeling colossus, a god of steel and fire. To him, it was a world, an environment, a cage, and a cathedral all at once. Every sensation was amplified, filtered, catalogued. The ember of self persisted, though it burned small and fragile beneath layers of obedience, graft, and servo-assisted precision. He remembered the first misfire, the first deviation from perfect function. A plasma conduit had overflared, the heat pulsing in uneven bursts, threatening to destabilize a limb. The princeps barked corrective commands, and the servitors responded instantly, adjusting coils and calibrating hydraulics. He felt every vibration, every subtle flex, every pulse of excess heat. It was proof that the machine, for all its godlike precision, could err. And in that error, he discovered the impossible, a space for awareness, for thought, for memory that was still his. Even inside a vessel designed to erase individuality, he was present. He catalogued the anomaly, not as a machine would, but as a witness to his own persistence. Outside, the battlefield continued its grotesque symphony. Orc warbands surged through the remains of manufactorums, artillery splintered spires, and columns of promethium flame licked the sky. Explosions reverberated through the Titan, transmitted directly into his fused body as both sensation and record. He felt the destruction intimately, noting the trajectories, impacts, and environmental shifts with obsessive care. And yet he could not act, could not alter, could not influence outcomes. He was a ghost lodged inside steel, a fragment of humanity observing annihilation from within a god machine. The contradiction was unbearable, yet necessary. Memory had become a weapon, awareness a shield, persistence the final rebellion. He felt the presence of the Scutarii crews above, their multi-limbed forms moving with efficiency and precision, attending to conduit, joint, and conduit again. Every touch, every vibration, every mechanical adjustment traveled into his nervous system. Sterile contact, yet he felt it all, an intimacy not intended by those who built the lattice of obedience. Oil slicked over grafted tissue, servos hummed against muscle, and he catalogued it all. Each sensation, each pulse, each micro-adjustment was data, and yet also proof that he was still human in a place designed to strip humanity entirely. Memories intruded despite the neural clamps. Laughter in the rain on Cadia, the smell of mud, the shouted orders of sergeants long dead, the taste of ration paste before the war had stripped the world bare. Each memory was forbidden, dangerous, yet indelible. He felt the clamps tighten in response, neural feedback sparking through grafted limbs and fused nerves. Pain was precise, electric, corrective. And yet, the ember persisted. He remembered. He endured. He catalogued. In this delicate interplay of sensation, memory, and correction, he discovered survival beyond obedience, defiance beyond rebellion, and the smallest vestige of freedom within the belly of the god machine. The Titan's foot struck another cratered plane with seismic force, sending reverberations through the chamber and into his body. He felt the world compress and expand, a private language of shock, heat, and movement that only he could interpret. He catalogued, he remembered, he endured. Survival required function, but endurance demanded memory. And in that balance, he found a strange serenity. The world outside could burn, the god machine could command, the orcs could rage, but he remained. The ember of self flared, faint yet indomitable. He allowed himself a forbidden thought, brief and impossible. I am still here. It was not a declaration, not a defiance, not a claim, merely acknowledgement. The Titan shuddered, as if in response, and the battlefield continued its relentless chorus. He was welded to the god machine, yet he remained, a witness, a recorder, a fragment of humanity preserved within steel, hydraulics, and fire. And as the next tremor rolled through the hull, he realized that endurance, awareness, and memory would carry him through what the body and machine could not, the unending war of self against erasure. The next step of the Titan lifted him, carried him forward, and with it, he felt the horizon widen. What lay ahead was no longer only battlefield and survival. It was rumor, mystery, and questions that even the Muggos Dominus could not answer. The ember would endure, and the journey was far from over. The battlefield faded from clarity as the Titan carried him forward, its immense bulk pressing across the ruined manufactorums and cratered plains. Yet within him a different horizon opened, one not measured in terrain, in orc bodies or promethium fire, but in thought, rumor, and forbidden perception. The Mugos Dominus spoke of the Omniscia in litany, praising the machine as divine, flawless, and eternal. To the Servitors, these were words that filtered past consciousness. To him, they became questions. Whispers passed through the neural lattice as anomalies, fragments of perception that suggested a truth he was never meant to see. Perhaps the God machine was not simply machinery, but a conduit to something larger, something unknowable, something that demanded devotion yet permitted awareness in rare, hidden ways. He felt it most in moments of stillness, when the Titan paused over a shattered plateau, the air thick with the scent of ozone and burnt promethium. The vibrations of the world continued, transmitted through joints and hydraulics, but beyond that he felt a presence. Not a voice, not a command, but a pulse, distant, muted, yet unmistakable. Servitors would have cataloged it as electromagnetic interference, a data anomaly, or an artifact of the neural lattice. He cataloged it too, yet something in the ember of self recognized it as more. The faint brush of something sentient, perhaps divine, perhaps a fragment of the Omniscia itself, reaching through steel and nerve to touch what remained of a human consciousness. The battlefield around him continued in grotesque detail. Orc warbands surged over twisted terrain. Artillery flares lit the sky in violent stabs of light, and the Titan moved through it all like a god that did not notice the world below. And yet, he did notice. Every shockwave, every tremor, every flare of promethium was catalogued in awareness, transmuted into memory, stored for the impossible possibility that it might someday serve a purpose beyond mere survival. Perhaps, he thought, the machine had a will beyond obedience, a will that had chosen him, not for action but for perception, for endurance, for witness. Perhaps his suffering, his persistence, was not an accident, but a component of a design so vast it could not be comprehended by a human mind. He recalled the whispered rumors among the lower servitors, fragments of conversation filtered through data slates, overheard in moments when the lattice allowed brief comprehension. Some claimed that the Omniscia did not merely inspire machinery, but oversaw it with fragments of consciousness, remnants of humanity or divinity fused into the core of engines. Others claimed that certain Titans were vessels, not just of war, but of observation, sentinels in flesh and steel to witness the universe itself. He did not know whether to believe these whispers, yet the ember flared, as if in acknowledgement that the rumor touched something real. Perhaps this was why he endured, why memory persisted, why the smallest spark of defiance had never been extinguished. The princeps barked orders, and the Titan obeyed with absolute precision. Yet, in the gaps between commands, he perceived patterns that no other could. The heat of the reactors pulsed like a heartbeat, the hydraulic pistons flexed with rhythm beyond simple function, and the vibrations of the battlefield formed a subtle harmony, a resonance that suggested intention rather than chaos. He wondered whether the Omniscia watched not only in ritual and prayer, but in the subtle, imperceptible flow of energy and motion, weaving obedience and awareness together into a tapestry of understanding too vast for any mortal to read. Sometimes, he imagined that the machine spoke in riddles he could not fully translate. Was the ember of his selfhood the machine's gift or its oversight? Was his suffering a punishment or a preparation? These questions were dangerous, impossible, yet necessary. The battlefield became a mirror for them. Orc warbands raging, promethium fires consuming, and the Titan moving like a god who did not perceive the small human flicker inside. Yet that ember endured, and in that endurance lay a connection both terrifying and sacred. He catalogued every tremor, every heat wave, every movement of the machine as if mapping a language only he could interpret. Perhaps it was the Omniscia's will, or perhaps it was mere chance. Either way, the spark remained. And as the Titan lifted another massive foot, crushing a spire of ruined manufacturing beneath its weight, he understood the next truth of survival. The God machine was more than metal, more than function, more than obedience. It was a cathedral of perception, and he, the ember of memory lodged in its belly, was its witness. The battlefield extended endlessly, yet inside him, a new horizon stretched further still. Rumor, mystery, and a quiet, impossible communion with a will beyond understanding. The Titan pressed onward, each step a seismic pulse that reverberated through his fused body, yet within that rhythm, he perceived subtler currents. The battlefield below, with its promethium fires, shattered manufactorums, and screaming orcs, became a backdrop for something he could not name, a hidden layer of perception beyond simple observation. Vibrations traveled through the pistons, the conduits, and the neural lattice, and in them he caught patterns, echoes of intent that did not belong to him or the princeps. Some part of the god machine, or perhaps the omnia itself, was whispering in a language too vast to comprehend, and yet he understood enough to feel its shape, as one senses a shadow passing over a sunlit plain. He remembered the whispered legends among lower servitors, rumors so carefully encoded in corrupted data slates that they were almost imperceptible. Some claimed that the omnia's presence could reach beyond circuitry, into flesh and nerve, seeking fragments of awareness to preserve, catalog, and perhaps refine. Others said that certain titans were chosen, not for firepower alone, but as vessels for observation, repositories of perception that allowed the divine mind to witness what no mortal could survive to see. He could not know if these were truths or superstitions, yet each anomaly he sensed, the microlag in a hydraulic piston, the strange resonance of a plasma conduit, the flicker of insight in his ember of selfhood, seemed to echo the whispers, suggesting that the rumor carried weight beyond fiction. The battlefield continued its grotesque symphony. Orcs surged in violent arcs across cratered plains, their crude war engines tearing through shattered walls, while Imperial artillery lit the horizon in brutal staccato flashes. Every tremor, every heat wave, every concussion passed through him, fused with grafted nerves and reinforced bone. He catalogued, he recorded, he felt, and in doing so he realized the impossible. He was both observer and participant, ghost and instrument, human and machine. His endurance was not merely survival, it was a dialogue with the incomprehensible, a witness to truth that no other could perceive. In fleeting moments of stillness, he contemplated the meaning of his persistence. Was the ember of selfhood that persisted inside the lattice an anomaly, a flaw in the god machine, or was it intended, preserved for purposes beyond mortal comprehension? Could the omnia, or fragments of its consciousness, have chosen him to endure, to remember, to witness the world as it unfolded in violence and fire? He did not know. The thought was dangerous, unlicensed, and forbidden, yet he could not resist the impulse to trace its contours, to map its weight in the vibrations and resonances of the Titan's body. Memory had become both rebellion and communion, survival and prayer. The princeps' commands continued, absolute and unyielding, yet in the space between directives, he felt anomalies ripple through the lattice. A conduit hummed with subtle variance, a piston shifted minutely, a data feed pulsed with an irregular rhythm. The Titan responded perfectly, executing orders flawlessly, yet he sensed in those fluctuations something beyond mere mechanical error. Perhaps it was the whisper of intent, the suggestion of cognition at a scale he could not fully measure. Perhaps it was the first thread of communion with something larger, a recognition that endurance and perception mattered, even if obedience demanded silence. Skitarii crews moved above and around him, efficient, mechanical, and unfeeling. Their touches were precise, corrective, essential to maintain function, yet he felt them as though through a veil. The subtle pressure of a limb against grafted flesh, the vibration of a servomechanism passing into his neural lattice, the heat of lubricated joints against the remnant of human skin. Every sensation was amplified, catalogued, remembered. In these moments, he discovered a strange sanctity. The world of metal, oil, and fire could not entirely erase him. The ember of memory persisted, a fragment of humanity lodged in a cathedral of war, a witness to both function and divinity. And as the Titan moved forward, crushing spires and debris beneath its immense weight, he felt the horizon of awareness expand. The battlefield extended endlessly, yet inside him, a deeper world opened, rumor, perception, and communion with forces whose magnitude he could only sense, never name. Survival demanded obedience, endurance demanded memory. And in that quiet, impossible defiance, he discovered purpose beyond firepower and flesh, to witness, to remember, to endure, and perhaps to glimpse the mind of the omnia itself.